Hey everybody, this is Chris Kopp, music director from School of Rock Santa Ana. Today I sit down with bassist for the United States Navy Band, Adam Smolonsky, and we talk about all things bass. Hope you enjoy it. So the first question I'd like to ask is if you could go back to youngster Smo bass, young Smolonsky, back when you were starting to play and whatever, this is pretty
Yesterday, I'm still young.
common question. You do have that baby face, but I think you're going on 50 or 55 now, man. So, it just, the camera takes off 20 years, that's what I hear.
Yeah.
If you could go to young Smo bass back in the day, what would you do? I mean, what kind of advice would you give yourself, or what would you tell yourself? Yeah.
The best weapon that we have in our sort of like fight to overcome the instruments and to learn how to play music is the daily chipping away at it. And that's more important in that there's a multiplicity of wonderful things that we can practice, including scales and arpeggios and all the things that everybody knows. But the thing that really makes it move is that daily application, because every one of our practice sessions is sort of like it's like a two-dimensional object. There's nothing that I can do today that's gonna like advance my playing. I'm stacking pieces of paper. I can make this much progress today.
Right.
Only after making, a couple of hundred
days of
progress does this become something you could like bump up against.
Right. Right.
So young Smo should not miss any days.
Every day, get on it. I think that's a great point, and that's something that I tell a lot of students and people that ask me too about how to get better at guitar. Or, hey, I've been playing for I know people that say they've been playing guitar for 5, 6 or more years, and they're like, man, I just can't learn. I can't get past this plateau. I'm like, well, what's your practice schedule like? What are you doing? He's like, well, the person they sit down for a couple hours on a Saturday or Sunday, or they play for their friends, or it's not prioritized and they're not doing it. And I always tell them, you would be better off to have 15 minutes a day. 30 would be pretty optimal, right? But if you could have 15 minutes a day, every day, and have someone guiding you to tell you what to practice in those 15 minutes, it's not just 15 minutes of like the blues scale and the songs you already know. It's stuff you don't know, pushing yourself for those 15 minutes. You'd be better off doing that every single day. You'd see more progress over time than you would for having 2 to 3 hours of playing stuff you already know for your friends on the weekend,
Yeah. Another thing that I think that happens when you come to it every day, your practice automatically starts to take direction because the mind wants to work that way. It gets bored. You're not going to play the same thing every day. If you're taking that 15 minutes, it's the same time, it's the same place, you're going to start trending in a way. You're going to start heading down a path, and there's exciting stuff.
Why is the 4-string bass the standard?
Well, I'm not an authority in this area, but my guess would be the reason that the standard is 4 is because although the upright bass had several iterations, including an era where 6-string was standard, in the 1950s, when the P bass was mass produced, it was 4. And so they wanted it to be like, yeah, it is really a bass, just like the big bass, so it had 4. And I think there's really nothing more to it than that. No design genius. It's just like bass has 4, P bass has 4.
Gotcha. Also, that was mass produced, like you mentioned. So that's what people had access to. That's what they were used to seeing, and that was commonly seen. So why have more than 4? What does that do?
Well, Fender did also make 6-string basses in the 60s, and those were kind of a hybrid. They were like, is it a bass? Is it a guitar? It could be tuned in fourths, or it could be tuned like a guitar. It was like 30-inch scale, a little longer than a guitar, a little shorter than a bass, and you would double bass line. So to the purists, take that,
It's been around for longer than you think, But you've chosen to have 5-string, and when we've played together, often 5 at least. I've mostly seen you play 5-string and sometimes 6.
Yeah, I like 5. I don't think there's any reason that students should if you're inspired by 6 or more strings, more power to you. You should get as many strings. I don't think it's more difficult. As a matter of fact, some people say, oh, I've got small hands, I can't play 5 or more strings, but it's ideal for small hands because the string spacing is closer and you're not having to move anywhere. You're not having to stretch. All the notes are right under in one hand position.
That's a good point. The more strings you have, the more of those scales you can play vertically versus having to shift positions horizontally.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It also provides some extended range as well. I mean, if the point of the bass is to support the bass, I mean, mostly, especially for students starting out, you are the niche that you have is the bass line, those low frequencies, right? So
That is true.
you want to have access to that range more. You would want maybe some lower frequencies all the way down to like B or A or whatever you're tuning that lowest fifth string to. It provides you just that little extra extended lower range that you can support the band with, you know?
Yeah, to really feel that. I do string this one. You know this probably, that this one is E, A, D, G, high C, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that weirds people out too. It's sacrilege. They're like, why would you have extra range and use it on top?
Right.
But this instrument is kind of a study tool for me. Like I learned this one to use. I use this one to learn and study and practice. And then when I go on gigs, I might use something more like what you see over there. You know,
yeah,
maybe not that exact, but something more a recognized platform.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, it allows you more chord access and some upper harmonies when you're playing with yourself and stuff too. If you're practicing at home, you know, you can play some of those higher chordal voicings and they sound maybe a little cleaner than they would on lower strings.
That's exactly it. And with the extra fourth above, it puts the instrument in a range that a grown man would like hum and sing, you know?
Yeah, sure. Right. And so also for jazz stuff too, I mean, that's a little more common than in the rock genre. I would think you have a lower B string or like lower strings would be more popular. But in the jazz context, that's actually probably not uncommon at all because they're going to fill in on chords and they're going to take solos and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. If you're going to play the melody, it's a very lovely sounding string, or it can be.
So
yeah, low B string is great too. And I also got low B string basses.
Sure. Well, and 6 strings where you can go both, right? Then you have the high.
You go both directions. Yeah. So the 8 string is really, it's a 6 string with bumpers.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're never needing to be on the extremities of that.
Ever. Right. So then also you tune that string you just mentioned to a fourth as a C. So like on a guitar, if you had 5 strings, it goes to B and not C, but you tune it in fourths.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any instrument other than the guitar that doesn't have a consistent. I mean, I suppose the ukulele. Well, what blows my mind, first, there's 2 things that would seem like intellectually consistent to me, and that was one, either tune it in all thirds or all fourths or all fifths, like a violin or something, or tune it to some sort of open tuning which has a pleasing sound when all open strings are struck. You know,
and a lot of people do. And actually, there's I have one of my guitars currently tuned to C all fifths. So the lowest string is C and then it's all fifths all the way up. That's a pretty common tuning. You've hit on the strange thing about guitar. The strange thing about guitar is there's not a lot of consistency and it's a really strange instrument. So the fact that, you know, even on bass, there's a couple different ways to play like middle C, for instance, or like your low C, right? There's a couple different ways to play that. On guitar, it's like 8 different ways to play the exact same note, you know, when you're talking about octaves and different string choices, and then, you know, talking about fingerings and where you play stuff, it makes the guitar a very complicated instrument. You know, it's easy to learn a few open chords and to learn to play, which is nice. And everybody can access it. That's why everybody and their mom plays guitar, which is awesome because you can learn songs very easily on it. There are a lot of songs written on it, especially rock and blues and that kind of stuff. But to really master the guitar is difficult because reading music is kind of hard because of the fingerings. Reading music is not necessarily harder than anything else that you learn to do. You just take time and you figure out how to do it. But on guitar, because you have so many options of where to place your fingers and playing the same note all over the neck, it makes it difficult to look at a piece of music and say, well, that's the position I'm going to play that in, or that's where I'm going to play that. So you see a lot of guys playing the same piece of music or the same thing in different positions all over the neck, different ways. There's no real right or wrong way to play the piece as long as it sounds right. So the beauty and the beast of it is that you can do it as you want and interpret it how you want. But the beast of it is that it can be very complicated to try to do that, you know?
You know, what's funny is that, like, in my personal experience, I'll be looking at a piece of music and trying to find a fingering or something, and I can pretty much narrow it down. Like I'll talk myself into thinking this definitely belongs here, like with, with the middle C under my pinky on the E string or whatever it is. And then for that reason, and I'll be like, and anything else is kind of silly. And that makes sense to me until I meet someone who's playing it another way, and they'll just swear up and down that
right.
for them, yeah.
How it is, yeah. Well, then you come across guys, especially on guitar, that don't have like traditional technique, or they don't have what you would consider like good technique or whatever. And playing it, and it sounds great and it sounds awesome. And one that I use all the time is John Mayer. Neon is this like really difficult song because of the way that he plays it, the technique that he has, which is his, at least from the stories I've heard of other people talking about it and him talking about it, it was really his sort of inability to play the finger style the way that he wanted. He was not really not capable. He wasn't taking advantage of all of his fingers. He wasn't using proper technique, traditional technique. And so he came up with this style where he's really only using two fingers. He's using his thumb and he's using his index finger, and he's playing this song. So it comes out with this like really percussive sound and this snappy sound. And it's this really interesting technique that is horribly flawed from a traditional standpoint, but sounds really good. So then you get these guys like that where, you can study your proper technique and proper fingerings and all this stuff all the way along. And then you get to a song like Neon or some other, Robert Johnson, and especially in the old days, and like these guys that just played what they heard and did the best they could to make the facility happen, regardless of what, specific technique they were supposed to be using. And then you try to play those tunes and it's like, man, it's nothing like what is supposed to happen, but it sounds great, so.
Well, we're also living under the curse and blessing of not having, hundreds of years of pedagogy backing us up. If you're a violin player, it's very clear where you got to go to, like physical academies. Which teacher should I see? Which method should I study? All of that is well known and passed down for generations and generations. For electric guitar and bass, there's really no such thing. There's no single answer for,
right.
Study first.
Right.
Sky's the limit,
And it almost doesn't matter who you study first, because they all come from a very small origination of the instrument. You talk about Robert Johnson, guys in the original, blues era, but then you can track like rock guitar back to some, small amount of a lot of Native American and African American musicians. And there really aren't any rock pieces or traditional rock pieces, rock and roll, that you can't track back through that lineage to just a few guys that started the sound, so.
Yeah, I'm going to bungle the facts on this, but what's kind of mind blowing to me is that, first electric bass, somewhere in the area of 1948 to 1952, Fender P bass became available in 1958, the Rubrics Cube, 1962. So you're talking about like a 4-year gap between like this instrument that people are like getting college degrees, like spending their lives trying to play, trying to make a living doing this. You might as well try to make a living using the Rubrics Cube, man, because you're involved in the same amount of tradition, in terms of who do I study and what do I study and what's the right way and what's the wrong way, what's the right way, who should I study to learn Rubrics Cube? That's all the reference we've got in terms of time.
It's the impact has been disproportionate to, you think it's been around longer than it has, because the impact of the creation of electric instruments in general, guitar, bass, keyboards, synthesizers, all that stuff, the impact of electrification has been so vast, so widespread and ubiquitous now. It's everywhere. You can't imagine a time when it wasn't electrified, that you forget that it's this century. I mean, well, I guess technically not this century, but within the last 70 years, these things were created, within a recent person that know's lifespan, these things were created,
I mean, it's completely taken over. And even the things that you think it could never take over, like, oh, the human voice, it's been the same since humans were humans. How could you ever change that? But when you hear some of these modern singers and you hear like that impossible breathiness in their voice, the band hits and it's like, bam, the band hits, and then you hear this nasal exhale before the note, and you're like, oh, like the microphone is so incredible. And
you could never have heard that before. Yeah, the microphone amplification. I mean, the idea in the beginning with big bands and stuff, when guitar started being added to big bands, specifically that I know about, the reason that although those like metal guitars and resonator guitars, the pie plate guitars, the slide guitars, all of that stuff was designed because there was no amplification. And that was a way to make the guitar resonate louder to compete with these big band instruments like trumpet and trombone, where you have these massive amounts of sound coming out of these instruments. The guitar just got buried. You couldn't even hear it before electric guitar. Then that was really the impetus of what drove people to develop that kind of an instrument, was that big band was super popular. And so the larger these bands got, the less you could hear these instruments and the voice and all of that stuff, you know. Hear vocalists, you couldn't hear singers, you couldn't hear that stuff. And they wanted to be able to reproduce the sounds of, the breathiness or the dynamics or the intricacies, and not just have to play like as heavy as possible to be able to be heard in this environment, you know. What are you listening to right now? Like, who are you listening to? What are you jamming out on?
Do you know about Polyphia?
Do not.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah, man. It's these kids these days playing it's like Tosin Abasi, but it's clean. It's only clean, and they got 1,000,002 ways to use the pentatonic. Like everything is strictly pentatonic, but it's like you never heard it before. It's hard rock for sure, and it's kind of metal, but it's a lot of clean guitars. I want to compare them to Animals as Leaders. Like, it's not intricate in terms of time signature or stuff like that, but it's certainly intricate in terms of it's very, well composed. It is progressive.
Through composed kind of music. You've been seeing the stuff that Jason Gay's been posting, man, all his saxophone transcriptions of, do you follow Jason Gay? So Jason Gay was in the Navy band for a while. I played with him in Chicago, and he's in Hawaii now. His last band was Hawaii, and then he got out in Hawaii, and he's like Derek Trucks solos, Eric Gale's solos, like on saxophone though, you know, like slide on sax. Like, he's a phenomenal player. I mean, he's amazing. And he's got on these blues guitar players. And so now he's transcribing all these blues guitar solos on saxophone, and it sounds super cool, to the point where Eric Gale's reposted his transcription of his playing of his solo. Like,
are you serious?
He's like getting really good notoriety, and for good reason. He's amazing, and he's doing a fantastic job covering. I mean, think about translating the guitar with bends and like all of these expressions, especially slide guitar, right? Like onto a saxophone, you know? Very cool stuff.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah,
I find it easier to go the other way, right, from saxophone to guitar.
That's typically, like, I have several saxophone books, you know, like, and yeah, I mean, not to mention like Coltrane book and the Omni books and whatever, you know, like, I mean, it's very common to go the other way, but he's flipping it on its head, man, and doing a really great job of it. Yeah.
Well, I know you and I have both been excited by Jacob Collier, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man.
All this stuff. It seems like there's something out every week. Like, I can't keep up with it. Which one?
So the one that I'm talking about, I forget what it was called actually, but it was him and this like this girl, and they're like meeting or having some relationship, and like at one point they're laying on a bed, but they're like standing up, and then she's like rolling around. Did you see that one? They're like sitting on
Sleeping in My Dreams.
Sleep in My Dreams or whatever. Yeah. Weird stuff, and like it's a little bit poppy, but he's just so. His harmonies and like his conceptualization and his ability of music is so high that it would be difficult, I think, for him to write a truly pop tune, you know, although this is fairly bubblegum as far as his stuff is concerned. It's still kind of a little out there. Like, the harmonies and stuff are strange, you know?
Yeah. I think he is interested in, I mean, everybody who doesn't want mainstream appeal, you know, sure. But he can, he's got the ability, I think. Yeah, he can do whatever he wishes. Yeah,
absolute pitch, like Dylan does, and like some of these other guys have. You know, he can just pick notes out of thin air and sing whatever he wants, play whatever he wants. But it ends up being that his songs are a little more orchestrated. They're a little more film scorey. You know, they're more textural than chordal or key centered. They're more textural. You know. I like your 1 minute videos, man. I like your stuff. You've been making any of those lately? Made any new ones? You gonna drop on it?
I kind of want them to be like that you could sort of get on a roll of watching them. Like, they're kind of linear. Like, if you start watching like one arm of them, that you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, you know, whatever it is, modes of bass. And then you're like watching this string, and it might branch off in a couple of directions.
And like you were mentioning too, the pentatonic scale has, you know, limited as it can appear to be, can be used in really ingenious and inventive ways. There are a lot of things you can do with the pentatonic scale, and a lot of things have been done with the pentatonic scale, to the point where you really, if you're thinking critically about it and practicing it, you really can't exhaust the possibilities of the pentatonic scale. Once you build on one, then it's like, oh, well, let me try these, stacked on top of each other. Well, what about these alternating back and forth? Well, how about that up the neck? Well, how about that down the neck? Well, let's go up in this one and down in this one, or whatever. There really are a lot of possibilities for the pentatonic.
Those three, that starting from the root, the fifth, and the ninth, that all of that is pretty mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody does that all the time.
Right. Because it's useful. I mean, it's not, cliches become cliches because they're used all the time, not because it just randomly happened,
Right. But it's also sort of the trick of like why sometimes I hear like a pentatonic lick that I know the shape of, like definitely know that shape, but like it hit my ear in this, like it's just cooler this time. And then when you transcribe it, you realize, oh, well, it's a fifth away from where I thought it was gonna be. I thought da 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 may do, like that, 4 3 4 5 3 1, but in fact it wasn't. It was away from there and like resolved to this note and ended on the ninth or something.
Right. Yeah.
Oh no,
using the same licks in that way, and then building stuff that way too, you using those like melodic cycles, so starting in the root and then starting on the third and then starting on the fifth and ending on the ninth, so where you're playing the same thing so the ear can follow it along, but when you end up is not where you thought you were going to end up. That's the coolest thing,
people say, and it's true, that you can learn anything on YouTube, but I'm glad that we went to school, because if you're learning on YouTube, you get no sense of context. Like here's the modes of the harmonic major right next to diatonic harmony, and like you don't know that Dorian and the harmonic major aren't too similar. Like one of those things is like deeply strange and esoteric,
and one of them is highly useful, and you do it all the time.
You're going to see it every day. Yeah. And that's, you get 15-year-olds that want to talk about octatonic scales and something like it. Just
you start to alienate people when you get in those veins. And it's not that it's untrue, and it's not that it's uninteresting information. It's just, if other people aren't on the same page, you're going to sound pretentious. And you're not going to be able to communicate, and it's a language. You want to communicate with people. I want to teach the language of music. I don't necessarily want to teach the conjugation and the grammar and all that. So I like that stuff personally, and I'm certainly happy to teach that. But that's not, where you start, and really maybe not in the middle. That's sort of where you kind of end up eventually,
I laughy-faced react a guy who posted a lesson about, it was the double harmonic major, which is spelled C, D flat, E, F, G, A flat, B natural, and C, I guess.
Yeah.
The double harmonic major, and that he, and all the modes of it. And I laughy reacted it and then put a like head exploding emoji under it. And he got mad at me. I was like, dude, I'm sorry, bro. What's the goal here? Are you trying to be a Nobel laureate? Like Chick Corea is that for music. He's the
absolutely
right, speaks in every idiom and blah blah blah, and no latency between his ear and his hand. But for most of us, it can be harmful on the internet because there's no context provided. So you're looking at it and you're thinking like, the pentatonic scale, that sounds wacky, but not any wackier than the double harmonic major.
You don't know. You have no frame of reference, just like you were talking about with the school. Like it puts this context around it where you understand what's sort of included in the general canon and what's not included in the general canon. And it doesn't make it any more or less important. It's just, these are the things that you're going to see a lot, and these are the things you're really not going to see at all.
I pretty well believe, and I posted this in one of the lessons, and someone else said this is when the harmonic major, the single harmonic major first came up, but I was saying there's really only three systems, and that's, natural, melodic, and harmonic, the 21 scales, and not more. That anything else is some kind of alteration.
It can complicate the waters when you're getting started because of exactly that. You don't have the context, you don't know where to start, and then you get these guys that are taking advantage of people that don't know. And a lot, they're trying to charge you to learn this stuff, and they're talking to you in these terms they know you're not going to understand, and they're taking your money to teach you things you don't understand. And where's the value? I just don't see the value in that. I feel like it's a little bit highway robbery. A lot of these guys that are teaching music, there's another guy I really like, Levi Clay, and I've got a few of his books. He calls out a lot of those guys. He calls out the guys that are just like this is nonsense. You're selling this book, you're selling this system, you're selling this thing, and it's impossible. It doesn't work. You're using a lot of fancy terms and a lot of music terminology, knowing that people aren't going to understand. They're going to pay you money hoping to learn this thing. And when they finally learn it, it's just either they can't do it or it's completely unimportant and you would never do it.
Here's an example of using the whole tone scale on the 5 chord in a minor key. And then the next 3 pages is that same thing, but in all 12 keys. So it's like, oh.
Yeah, cool. You didn't need to write that out. Like, I just need to do that, Right. Absolutely. Man, I appreciate you for meeting me, man. Have a good week, man. We'll chat soon.